Even though I do believe Detroit is going to be way better than 14 wins this season, I think that the 13th seed would probably get you 26, 27 wins, and that's a successful season if you double your win total from last year.
Look a lot better this season, but the East is still very competitive. Like I said, this is the most talented the NBA has ever been, in my opinion. Someone's got to finish 13th in the East.
2-26, bad. No way. Nobody that bad. So yes, I think we can turn it around. I think we can play a lot better brand of basketball than we're playing right now.
They didn't bring us here to change the past.
We have the pieces here to do that. You know, we have some rough and rugged guys that don't mind mixing it up, guys that don't mind scrapping and can play with a grit. But then again, understand how playing selfless basketball impacts winning. You know, come February, come March, like you'll be able to turn on the TV and you'll be like, oh, that's Detroit Pistons basketball.
In my whole 9 years in the NBA, I've never had this much fun coming to the gym.
The Detroit Pistons looked to become one of the biggest dumpster fires in NBA history. Nothing was looking promising for the future of Detroit basketball, but one thing changed, and now all of a sudden the Pistons were solidified playoff contenders and are way ahead of schedule in their rebuild, which was supposed to take maybe a few more years. With guys like Cade Cunningham and Ausar Thompson taking the next leap, guys like Jalen Duren really stepping up towards the second half of the year, and with veterans like Tobias Harris and Malik Beasley really contributing to this team, it was very easy to see why the Detroit Pistons made such a dent. And remember, they did this all without their starting shooting guard Jaden Ivey, who will be returning next year unless he gets traded. We all know that a lot of experts and especially a lot of YouTubers projected the Detroit Pistons to miss the playoffs or make the play-in. The problem was though is that no one could have saw this historic rise. I remember in my NBA predictions video, which I made on my other channel back in the day, I had the Detroit Pistons finishing 10th in the Eastern Conference, which at the time actually generated me some hate. Not a lot of people wanted to see the Detroit Pistons succeed yet because I don't think that they could realistically understand the idea that last season was one of the biggest flukes in NBA history. The Detroit Pistons were never this bad. They were just mismanaged. Monty Williams was hired and all of a sudden he's on a 5-year deal being one of the highest paid coaches in the NBA, but he led them to absolutely utter in dismay. There's nothing that Monty Williams brought to this team coming off of a failure of a Suns project, which we talked about in my last video, that could change Detroit basketball for the better. In fact, Detroit basketball was not only getting better once they fired Monty Williams, they hired the perfect guy. They went out and signed JB Bickerstaff. Now, JB Bickerstaff was a phenomenal coach for many years with the Cleveland Cavaliers, with the Memphis Grizzlies, and he most certainly could have been better. But there was nothing wrong with hiring JB Bickerstaff, most importantly, because he had something to prove. He led the Cavaliers to some decent records over the years, but was let go in for Kenny Atkinson, who just put in one of the best coaching performances of the year, leading the Cavaliers to the 1 seed, and he was just named your 2024 to 2025 NBA Coach of the Year. But JB Bickerstaff had something to prove, and he had a young team with a lot of heart and grit to go along with it. JB Bickerstaff inherited the perfect situation. He's been coaching in the league for over 20 years now, and he finally gets, in my opinion, his greatest opportunity to show why he's a dominant head coach in the NBA, and I think he did a great job. We got to remember, this Pistons team last year was one of the worst NBA teams of all time, and they flipped it around so easily with JB Bickerstaff. I think he deserves 99% of the credit. JB Bickerstaff was possibly the greatest thing to happen to Detroit basketball since acquiring Cade Cunningham, which sounds insane, but Detroit fans have been going through a lot. Detroit basketball has been down in the gutter for what seems like decades now, and I feel like they really haven't shown anything since Ben Wallace has been around. I feel awful for Detroit basketball fans, and I don't understand how they even exist. As a Toronto Raptors fan, I can't help but realize that the purgatory we're about to be stuck in for the next maybe 5 years, so maybe it's a little bit better than being awful. But to be honest, the worst thing an NBA team can be is mid. You never want to be mid. You always want to be good or you want to be bad. You never want to be the Atlanta Hawk. And the Detroit Pistons, by hiring JB Bickerstaff, were able to avoid this entire situation because he propelled their rebuild into a completely new lens. In that offseason too, Detroit knew that they had the talent. I mean, Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren, Ausar Thompson, they don't come across, out of the blue. Those are good NBA players. And I made a video on Jalen Duren and how dominant he could be in the NBA, and he really turned it on in the second half of the season. First half of the season, Jalen Duren was atrocious. But they also signed Malik Beasley. Malik Beasley is one of the best three-point shooters in the league and showed it this year. There wasn't a game where Malik Beasley really wasn't a threat to score the ball. Now, whenever I watch Malik Beasley, I feel like he's either destined to drop 6 points or he's destined to drop 18, and there really isn't any in between. But Malik Beasley was a perfect signing for a Detroit team that not only needed a true three-point shooter, but also needed a veteran presence. Tim Hardaway Jr. was brought in to provide some scoring and veteran leadership off the bench, which he did at a nice role, and Tobias Harris returned to Detroit after a few years in Philadelphia to play power forward. This was the most perfect signing in my opinion. Tobias Harris coming off of a couple years in Philly where things were just looking down, and now all of a sudden he's going to a young team where he can be this veteran leader and really try to push these boys into being better men and better people. Tobias Harris, there was no one better to sign than Tobias Harris. He also filled a position of need. When you look at the Detroit Pistons roster, you had Cade Cunningham at the 1, Jaden Ivey at the 2, Asar Thompson at the 3, Tobias Harris at the 4, and then Jalen Duren at the 5. When you take away Tobias Harris and you really look at the Detroit Pistons roster, it gets thin at power forward. Who are you going to start? There's a lot of options that aren't good. Ron Holland is a rookie, and honestly, Ron Holland played pretty decently for only getting 15 minutes a night. You have Simone Fontecchio, who is again a three-point threat, but nothing crazy. Bobby Clintman is a G League guy, and Lindy Waters was acquired late. So realistically, there wasn't anything brought to this Detroit team at the power forward position. You can't really play Isaiah Stewart there. He's not really built to be a power forward. People like JB Bickerstaff understood that this team was a lot closer than people thought. And what made such a big difference in this team was changing the mentality. Bringing in these veteran pieces signified to the locker room that, hey, we're ready to make a push to the playoffs. We're ready to make this push. Let's accelerate this rebuild. And as I said, I predicted them to finish 10th in the East and make the play-in. But they ended up finishing 6th in the East and getting an automatic bid into the playoffs. And now I think they're one move away from being NBA greats. One thing was very clear though. Cade Cunningham had to become first overall pick level of a player. Cade Cunningham, I feel like he was a decent player. I'm using the word decent loosely. Cade Cunningham was a very good NBA player. Injury riddled, sure. But was he worth the hype in the first overall pick up to this point? That's arguable, especially in his draft class with guys like Jalen Green and Scotty Barnes, just to name a few names. There were definitely some guys that you could say were playing better than Cade Cunningham up to this point, but I think this season Cade Cunningham left all those accusations behind him. He averaged 26 points, 9.1 assists, 6 rebounds. He got a steal a night. He played in 35 minutes and only missed 12 games. When we get a healthy Cade Cunningham for a full season, we get a player who could possibly contend for an MVP one year. If Cade Cunningham was putting up 26, 9, and 6 a night on a team that is top 2 in the East, he's going to get an MVP conversation. It's just bound to happen one day. I think Cade Cunningham could very easily win an MVP with numbers like this, and I think that it's not out of the realm of possibility that it could happen in the next 5 years. But Cade Cunningham for sure has the talent to be one of the better NBA players in the history of the game if he can stay healthy and if he can lead Detroit to better NBA success. Also, a lot of rising stars were a big piece of this Pistons team. I touched on Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey only played 30 games before he broke his leg, and it was a nasty break, mean injury. He'll come back, but part of me expects Jaden Ivey to be a part of a trade for a superstar. I don't want to name names, but I always want to campaign for Devin Booker to be on the Pistons. I think him and Cade Cunningham would be the perfect backcourt and the best backcourt in the league. Devin Booker would be able to play off the ball kind of like he did with Chris Paul and create his own shot. To this day, I still believe that Devin Booker and Chris Paul was the perfect Devin Booker. And I think that he can go back to being that perfect player with Cade Cunningham. I think they'd have to give up Jaden Ivey, maybe Ron Holland, and picks, but especially if Devin Booker requests out, it could get pretty dicey in Phoenix and it could get a whole lot better for Detroit. But a lot of rising stars were also already on the Pistons. Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren were two very young players that made big impacts. Asar Thompson is probably a top 10 defender in the NBA, and Jalen Duren had a phenomenal second half of the NBA season. Many people were putting him on fraud watch after the first 20, 30 games of the year, but boy, did he step it up. He became the Jalen Duren that we remember. I would still like to see him maybe take another step defensively, but other than that, he's a very good interior threat, pounding in the paint. You can get him 10 and 10 a night very easily. And Asar Thompson, I mean, I'm impressed. I know Amen Thompson is a different breed of player, different breed of athlete, but Asar Thompson is a lot closer to being Amen than people give him credit for. He's very good at basketball. He's very good. And I just don't think the playmaking and the ball handling is there for Asar as much as it is for Amen. But I think Asar could develop a jumper before Amen. But again, both of them have awful mechanics. It doesn't look likely. One trade really only happened for the Detroit Pistons. On February 6th, acquired Dennis Schroeder and Lindy Waters from the Thunder in exchange for KJ Martin, a 2028 second round pick, and a 2031 second round pick swap. So basically, by adding Lindy Waters, who is a three-point shooting threat who barely played in Detroit, but a good veteran piece, and Dennis Schroeder surprisingly made an impact in Detroit and was able to really lead this team. By adding these older players and continuing to add them, Detroit made it very clear of their intentions to push deep into the playoffs. There was no hesitation from the front office to get older, but also get experience in this team for the younger players. And I think that's something that a lot of other NBA front offices could use some experience in doing. Don't be afraid to get older if it means you're going to get better. If you're ready to win, maybe it's time to get older. The Detroit Pistons would be pretty decent throughout the regular season. I mean, they won against, of course, some of the top teams in the East, in Milwaukee and Cleveland. And their playoff push was really impressive. They would end up playing the New York Knicks in the first round of the NBA playoffs after finishing the season 44-38, 6 games above 500, and a very impressive record. Now, if you were me and you saw a young Detroit team, fiery, lots of fights against the Timberwolves, even the Knicks, Isaiah Stewart is one of the biggest menaces in the NBA right now. So what do you do when you see players that care this much about the city? Well, you predict them to win in the first round. And although I did get this prediction wrong, what Detroit was able to do against New York was super impressive. If New York struggled that much against Detroit, I question their ability against Boston. As of now, they're up 1-0 in the series, but Boston missed like 43 pointers against them in game 1. It's not looking promising for the Knicks. Detroit will be back, and Cade Cunningham will be an MVP candidate, and Asar Thompson has all the potential to take that next step. Detroit is one big move away from being a top team in the NBA. They're one big move away from consistently winning 50 to 55 games a season. They're one move away. And I think that was really showcased over the course of this year. Detroit basketball is back, and the NBA is better when there's a grit and grind, hard-nosed, tough team in the NBA like the Pistons. And honestly, I couldn't be more happy to turn on my TV and watch Detroit Pistons basketball this NBA season.